So welcome, everyone. I want to extend a welcome to everyone out there, as well as our panelists that I'll be introducing. But first, I'm Dr. Lauren Schwartz. I'm a psychiatrist and psychotherapist in private practice, but I have also had the honor of serving as a fellow of Fair in Medicine for the last couple of years. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Fair in Medicine, we're part of the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism, and we're a group of medical and mental health professionals dedicated to advancing fairness, understanding, and our common humanity in today's healthcare. We're glad that you're here joining us. And what I'd like to do is just go around and introduce our panelists, some of whom you'll see and some of whom are off camera to protect the privacy of not only their privacy, but also the privacy of their children. So tonight, what we're going to talk about and talk with is we're welcoming parents with inconvenient truths about trans. And they're a community of parents impacted by transgender ideology who question the medicalization of children and young adults. The popular Substack publishes their personal stories and essays, and they have over 11,000 subscribers. It's free to subscribe, so hopefully that's part of what we're doing tonight is getting their story out to all of you, but also hopefully we can get all of you guys engaged in the Substack and participate in that as well. So I'm going to go around and just introduce our participants. Our first panelist, Josie, is the mother of a trans-identifying son. She's the co-editor of PITT's book, Parents with Inconvenient Truths About Trans, Tales from the Homefront in the Fight to Save Our Kids. She's also the co-founder of the Substack. Kate has joined us as well. She is a librarian, a parent of an adult medicalized daughter. She has been in private and public education for many years, and we're thankful to have her join us. Our next panelist is Dr. Maggie Goldsmith. She's a clinical psychologist. She is a parent of a now desisted trans-identifying daughter, author of the PITT essay, To My Daughter's Therapist, You Were Wrong. In my understanding, I just found out this is really what brought PITT into kind of the a more mainstream awareness of what's going on. So hopefully we get to hear more about her story. And then Emily Gordon is a nurse and mother of a trans-identified son. She has worked in the medical field for 22 years and has experience caring for transgender patients. Her experience in caring for transgender adolescents and adults influenced the way she approached her son's sudden trans declaration during his adolescence. And what I'd like to do is just start off and let each one of our panelists take a turn just talking about what brought them together, and tell their story. Certainly as a mental health and medical provider going through all this, I cannot thank you guys enough. I think every single parent, doctor, psychologist, therapist, counselor, teaching administrator, every single person needs to read this book and hear your story. So my hope is being here at FAIR and on this webinar, we can get those stories out there even more than they already are. I am so thankful that you all are here. So we can really start off with if Josie, if you'd like to talk first, or if someone else wants to chime in, we don't have a particular order, and feel free to pass the torch on when you're done talking, or we'll pivot to questions.
Well, I can go first because we started on the PITT Substack back in June of 2021. My son had become trans-identified in 2019, and we just wanted to get the information out. So another mom and I started writing our story, and we had joined a boys group of parents with trans-identified sons, and a bunch of us started writing our story, and then we created a Substack and started telling our stories, and we started publishing them like twice a week, and it just sort of took off. We had no expectation. We just felt the need to get our stories out into the world because we felt like we weren't able to find any stories when this first happened. And so all of a sudden we would ask other parents we knew, would you write your story? And they did. And then we'd publish, and we just kept getting pieces. and then Maggie Goldsmith sent me an article, and we published that, and that would have been, I think, at the beginning of September of 2021, and it went viral, and then we just kept getting more and more pieces. Parents would just send me their story to the email, and we got so many stories that we started publishing 5 days a week, which we still are. And my theory about my whole reason behind it was, I thought, if they can discount a few parents' stories, but how many can they say this isn't happening? And we now have published over 530 stories. And we still get them, not every day, but I get a lot, enough that we're still publishing 5 days a week. My personal story is my son is now 19, and he's still trans-identified. And, I do anything to bring him back, but right now I just want to reach parents. And we also want to reach parents whose kids are not trans-identified, because we feel very strongly that this could happen to any parent.
One of the things, and just if it's okay if I follow up with a question before we pass it on to someone else, one of the things that is mentioned in the book is that idea of almost the parental dysphoria, all the things that you go through as a parent. And that certainly in the mental health community, we would love to be able to support in any way we possibly can, not just the children going through this, but obviously it impacts your whole family. And we know you guys have gone through so many just horrific things in this process. Would you mind sharing a little bit just about how it impacted you or your family?
Yeah, it's been a pretty terrible experience. My son was a typical boy, and he never had any gender confusion, and it just sort of came out of the blue, which Lisa Littman's study had said rapid onset gender dysphoria, but I didn't know what it was. I just knew that he wasn't. I just felt he's not trans, it's something else, he's confused. And so we were searching for what that was, and then I did come across the research, but it took me a long time, because in 2019 you couldn't find the information. At least I could not find the information, and I searched and searched. But I knew in my heart that this wasn't what was really happening. And we asked him patiently to just wait. And then I did the research, and then I felt confident to talk to him and say, I think this is something else. And he didn't believe us. And he, unfortunately, every other adult in his life was, throwing him a party and celebrating this new identity, except his mom and dad. And so it ended up, even, one of the teachers at school even was trying to help him move out of our house. We were considered unsafe and abusive, and we loved him so much and still do. And, he moved out a year ago, and we have not heard from him since. But we did everything we could to try and help him and not medicalize. And we said, you can be whoever you want. You can, if you want to be trans, but please don't take the hormones. But he was so indoctrinated in school that he just didn't believe we were the safe people. He got convinced we were the wrong people. And my son and I were so close that because it was so shocking to me that this could possibly happen, that I feel the need to speak out, because if it could happen to me, I feel like it could happen to anybody.
Well, absolutely. And I so appreciate, I cannot imagine how hard it would be to share some of this, but I think also knowing, and that's something that, although not from your book. It's from, I know, the individual who wrote the intro to your book, from Stella O'Malley, and that she talks about just in general, everyone needs to know that parents and carers know their children better than anybody else. So the quote from her book is that, they know them better than doctors, teachers, therapists, or sports coaches. And parents also love their children more than anyone else. And there's usually no one on the planet who is more invested in seeing their children thrive than them. And obviously you guys are those parents, and all the parents here, I believe, are as well. And so again, I just thank you so much for sharing your story. And is there anything else you want to add to that?
I just also think that, once your child tells you that they're trans, you're too late. They are so caught up in it. So we want to get the message out to parents that you need to educate yourself and your child before that happens. And that is what a lot of us parents who have been dealing with this a long time are really trying to get that message out to parents, that you need to just really safeguard yourself. You need to be careful who your kid is alone with, an adult, even a doctor. You could go to the pediatrician and they could tell you to leave the room, and then they could ask your child, do you really believe you're a boy, or do you really believe you're a girl? And it just plants these seeds in these kids that are very vulnerable. And, they just see the trans flags and all the signage all over. And so they get confused. And so as parents, you need to really safeguard them and be very careful about which school you pick, and make sure those teachers know who you are. And it's a really tough time, maybe the toughest time ever to be a parent right now.
Absolutely. No, I thank you so very much. And I agree. I think that's something that we try to instill in parents now, is know and learn about this stuff. Even if it's not in your home, it could be very quickly. Have these conversations with your kids often. Connect with your kids about these topics. Not that you guys were not doing that, but like you said, there was just not a tremendous amount of information to connect with, and certainly not coming from the folks that were supposed to be the experts in this, and helping you in the either medical or mental health field or in the school system. So I guess if we want to transition over, Kate, do you feel like going next? Would you like to?
Sure. I'm happy to jump in.
All right.
And you can see my face on camera, because one of the boundaries that I've set after being in this for a number of years for myself is that I want to be able to be more public about it. With that, of course, just like the other parents here, I believe that my kid deserves privacy. And so I'm a little bit more circumspect about what I'll share. But my kid has been trans identified since 2017 at this point. And again, I went into like that first announcement, thinking that I knew something. I had ideas around what it meant to be trans. I had, as you mentioned, I was in education, and so I'd had some trainings. And I just kind of believed what I had been told. I'd had some questions, but I thought that it meant something, that when my kids started to try to explain these feelings around being trans, and I realized that actually it was so amorphous and not something that they could explain. It was at that point that I started to have questions like, well, wait a second. I'm starting to realize that there is no that there's nothing really defined here. And as Josie mentioned, it was hard in 2019. It was impossible in 2017. I'm a librarian by trade. I research all the time. I could not find anything that was addressing some of the questions that I had. The saving grace for me was that I was actually in a local group, a women's group of 10 women, where at that point, 4 of us had family members. When I still remember going into a get together, and my kid had just made this announcement and I hadn't told anybody, and sitting there thinking, there are 10 women here, and 4 of us have kids who are either our children, our grandchildren, our niece, our nephew, who are trans identified. This makes no sense. What is going on in the culture? And none of those parents or grandparents or aunts or uncles affirmed. And so I'm in a very liberal area. They were all very liberal. But it was so kind of early in this that it wasn't seen as a bad thing to be like, no, this doesn't make any sense. And so I saw desistance early. I saw not non-affirmation, but loving support early. And so that was a saving grace for me. But I see so many parents now who are often alone in their friend group or in their family. And I'm so grateful that there are resources that they can find online now. I'm so grateful that they have a voice on the PITT Substack. I think that makes a tremendous difference for parents who are really emotionally struggling with this. And I see a lot of hope because, as Josie mentioned, like, you can proactively make a difference to your kid, so that you don't end up following in our footsteps, for sure.
Are there any, I mean, kind of along the way, and I know this is a kind of a broad question, but I think for anyone out there who does want to understand better, I mean, outside of certainly read the book, there's a couple of other books that I highly recommend. The When Kids Say They're Trans, to understand more about it. It's a wonderfully complimentary book to PITT's book. And then, looking at, there's the Gender, a Wider Lens podcast that I think can be wonderful for people to understand. This is not about denying a child's dysphoria or not wanting to support them in their path. That adolescence and childhood can be very, very difficult, and a lot of mental health issues arise. That it's not about not supporting them. It's about supporting the whole of who they are now, today, and then also in the future, and their future as a healthy, growing adults who's more flexible with their identity and things like that. Do you have any advice maybe, or just things that you would like to say in terms of experiences you've had with providers, or what could have made experiences better, or what we can do to improve awareness in the future? That's kind of a loaded, there's a lot of pieces there, but
there are a lot of pieces there. For me in particular, are you talking about like on the medical side? Or are you talking about on the school side, on the social side?
Really, we could probably benefit from any and all areas. Maybe if there's any experiences that you had eventually that were positive in interacting, maybe it was with a medical provider or maybe a therapist or someone at a school that listened and engaged.
Yes, well, my experiences in the medical environment were not particularly positive. My local pediatrician, I'm about 100 miles north of LA. And so my local pediatrician immediately, like, I did bring this up at the next doctor visit. And the response was essentially, oh, we can send you down to Children's Hospital LA. We don't handle that here. And it was essentially, and I completely understand, it was a very disruptive moment, and I'm sure that they were starting to see these numbers tick up. I thought, wow, I don't think I want to go down to LA for this. And, thank God that I followed my instincts on that. But, everywhere you went started asking, and I was blindsided so many times. Like, I didn't expect to go in for a blood draw with my child and to be asked, oh, by the way, what are your pronouns? And I was in this strange, like, halfway affirming, non-affirming, supporting, and so being blindsided by those questions was disruptive to our relationship. And I was trying kind of fly by the seat of my pants in the moment. I think now parents all know, hopefully parents of younger kids know, and are more aware of that. But, I couldn't find a local therapist that didn't want to jump in and, and just affirm that just there weren't the options that there are now. You just couldn't find anything like that. And everything felt very, very risky.
Well, and like I said before, we joined on this webinar, I will be the first to apologize for the medical community and the mental health community that have failed so many families and children in this. And my hope is that this webinar can help extend your stories to have a greater reach, a much further reach, so that we can help in, again, treating children as an entire person, not this one particular thing, that I think a lot of times when in this process becomes this focal point, where all distress is dumped into one thing, and there's so many things that are missed, and there's so much divide in families. And so
Yeah.
I am so sorry for what you've been through. And
the one thing I would add to that, Lauren, and I think probably the other parents on this call would agree with me, is that it's one thing if society has been changing, or a segment of society is changing its definition of what they mean by gender and sex. But when you are a researcher, or when you are a parent who is going to dive deep on this, and you start to look at the studies that all these agencies are pointing to, and you realize that they are so flawed, and you realize that your kid is heading towards a medical path that will shorten their lives, that will harm them, that will stunt their connections and their relationships. That is where I really have strong feelings, because our children have been betrayed, and that's not just our children, that's all the children that are involved on this. And it's frankly appalling.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. And my hope is, again, that this story will help you, help others, and we can, like I said, every single person on this webinar, and then every single person that hopefully it can then touch needs to read your book, understand these stories. And absolutely, there are lots of resources, and we will make sure that we connect folks to it, where all of these studies can be seen, the ones that you were describing, that from everything from the social transitioning, and that it's not a neutral stance, and that you get into the puberty blockers that are not always reversible. They do harm. The cross-sex hormones that absolutely all can lead to permanent changes, some that we know, and more scary we don't know. That absolutely we've got to have folks understanding that, and children and their families deserve that. So is there anything else right now that you want to add, or that?
That's it for me for now.
Okay, Kate, I so appreciate you sharing your story. Dr. Maggie Goldsmith, would you like to chime in next, or?
Hi, sure, I can hop right in. So just in terms of how I got involved in PITT, I think that it was, when the first stories started coming out, I was on the forums, the parents, the gender critical forums, and people were putting links to the stories to PITT. And I was reading them, and in my mind, I wanted to write something, but I wanted to really give something to all these parents. And what I wanted to give was a pushback. And I think that I waited until I could push back, and I could talk about the pushback. I waited until my daughter was fully desisted from this, so that I could offer other parents some hope and some strength, and something that, as a clinician, but also as a parent, that I could say, no, you're not crazy. Yes, this is insane. And yes, you should push back. And this is how I did it. This is what I did. I wrote that essay sitting in a cafe. The story in the essay is that I took my daughter overseas. I took her to our ancestral homeland. And the nice thing about our ancestral homeland is that it's a place where there are no gendered pronouns. So that was lifted. But also, I mean, although not ideal, gender roles are very clear. And also there is a very strong sense of identity, of national identity there. And I think that like she needed a stronger sense of identity, but she also needed to like see people who looked like her and see people who could like spell her last name without trouble. You know, so it was all those things. Like she was immediately in an environment where she was embraced, where she belonged, and where there was no gender anything, because it just doesn't exist there. I mean, it wasn't easy because I basically like, you know, I closed my practice. I referred my cases to other colleagues. I left my son and my husband behind, and we just took off. The thing is, I think she had started to already desist before that, and because she bought into the idea of traveling. So a lot of people think, you know, I don't think it's true that like she desisted because we went overseas. I think she was desisting, and going overseas really like solidified it. So I wrote the essay sitting in a cafe overseas, in the city we were in, and sort of like, I mean, I had no idea that it would like go viral, as Josie said, but it did. And I think the reason is because it was a pushback. And I think a lot of parents sort of wanted that. They wanted this, like, you know, how do I push back? It didn't even start as an article. Honestly, I started it as a letter to my daughter's therapist, you know, and just kept writing and writing and writing. And then eventually it just turned into what it is. So yeah, so that's pretty much it. And, you know, same as everyone else, when this hit my family, I was also blindsided in a way. I did not handle it well initially. I went to a very sort of intellectual place, and I said to my daughter, "This is insane. This doesn't make any sense. Like what are you talking about? This is I'm a psychologist, and I'm telling you that this doesn't make any sense." But part of the problem was I was a psychologist, and she did not want to hear it. You know, she wanted me to be mom, and she wanted me to be scared, and she wanted me to be attentive, and she wanted me to be a lot of things. Maybe that being a psychologist didn't do for her. So I think at least in the case of me and my child, it was about our relationship. She needed something to change. She needed something to change in her world. She needed something to change in the important and very sort of connected relationship that she and I had. And she didn't know how to say it. So instead of asking for change, she decided she's going to change herself in a way. And so I try to think about this now. I'm treating my patient population is almost entirely gender dysphoric, gender questioning adolescents and young adults and their families. And I try to impart this to the families that I'm working with, that this is not about gender. This is about something else. This is your child saying something needs to change, and I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to do this. And so I'm going to scare you, and I'm going to demand that you listen. I mean, I think at the core that's what it is, but I also think that it goes off the rails very quickly. So, we have to find a way of bringing it back to the relationship, and back to, what is it that you need from me? What do you need me to change about myself, about our relationship? So that's it. I mean, I also, I have to say that recently, I think it was on a recent Wider Lens podcast, there was someone on who said, be prepared for the fight of your life. This is the fight of your life. This is going to be the hardest parenting you'll ever have to do. And so it's really important to take care of yourself, physically, mentally, emotionally. When I was, before we went away, when I was still here in the States, I was in therapy myself 3 times a week. I couldn't have done it any other way. The other thing is that I did open up to my colleagues, some of whom were sort of shocked at first, and were shocked that I was going against the common wisdom of you must affirm. But I think that because they knew me, they knew my reputation, they knew I was a solid clinician, they believed me. And they believed that I wasn't like some hysterical, person making no sense. So that's part of self-care, is reach out to the people who care about you and who are there for you. Yeah, that's about it. I can also tell you something about how to vet a therapist.
Absolutely. I would love to hear about that. That's one of the reasons, I think we were talking about this beforehand, I have become so passionate about speaking out about this. I'm not a public speaker, but I'm so thankful to be here with all of you.
Yeah.
I helped and had the honor of writing one of the appendices in Dr. Miriam Grossman's book, Lost in Transnation. And that was one of the appendix that I worked on, was how to vet a therapist.
Yeah.
So I would love to, and I think parents would benefit from that it's okay to ask, how you go about finding someone who's going to support your whole child in a developmentally appropriate, comprehensive, thorough way, and include your family and take and utilize approaches that we know have been widely utilized for decades. Please, yes, I think that would be wonderful.
So I think even before you talk to the therapist, I think you sort of look at the features of this person's practice. Is this person in a group practice? Because if this person is in a group practice, chances are that the group is going to be affirming, because a group has a lot more exposure and a lot more anxiety about being exposed to repercussions, be it social, legal, or whatever. But if you have someone who's in private solo practice, that person is going to be able to at least think more independently. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I would urge people to find a clinician who is older and who did their training probably prior to around 2012, certainly prior to DSM-5. Someone who was trained prior to all of this. Because unfortunately, what's happening now in clinical training programs is they're not getting the solid clinical training. So if you have someone who is young and who is in an agency, run the other way. That's my opinion. The other thing is, you do want someone who is willing to work with the family. Because this is definitely a family-based thing. It's like, when you treat eating disorders, you treat the family, because the child is eating in the family. The food issue is the family issue. So you treat the whole family. And anyone who's not seeing it that way is not someone you want to be working with. So those are just a few hints that I can offer. Yeah, that's about it.
Wonderful. No, absolutely. I think there's just so much information here that families, but also providers, I hope, there are physicians out there, pediatricians, psychiatrists, psychologists, they're all listening to this and knowing that, of course, there's never been a time where we haven't involved families. Yes, are there severe cases of abuse and neglect? Sure, that's a totally different ballgame. That's not what we're talking about. Emily, you ready to jump in and talk with us about your story?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. My son, well, I guess I should start by saying that I am a nurse, and I have worked in a clinic with trans-identified adolescents and adults, and for a long time, it was just the way it was. I didn't really even think twice about it. I didn't really question where it was coming from. They just sort of appeared, and we just picked up where they left off. And I wasn't doing any of the prescribing for the hormones or anything, but I would take care of the rest of their health. And I had a couple of teenage girls who were lesbians, and they came in together and decided that they wanted to be gay men. And so I was very confused by the whole thing, but I just kind of, I was just there. They would come in every once in a while. I wasn't really participating in their actual transition, but I watched the whole thing play out. And eventually one of them went fully into it. Like, she got her breasts removed and she grew a beard. And then the other one decided that she wasn't going to be transgender anymore and went back to being like a girl. And they taught me a lot about the words, about all the different surgeries and the different things. And it was just like a curiosity. I didn't really think it would ever affect me. And then one day, my son, this was in like May of 2020, he just said, "Mom, I know this is going to come as a surprise, but I was born in the wrong body." And I said, "Well, are you sure you're not gay?" Because I always kind of had I kind of didn't. He was always very masculine, but he was very loving, sweet boy, just not your typical rough and tumble. I have two boys, and there's a big difference between the two of them. So I never really thought he was gay because, we lived where it was pretty conservative and kids didn't really learn about sexuality like that. But, fast forward, I always kind of thought, oh, well, this is because he doesn't want to be gay. And my husband said, we're not going to foreclose on any identity. It doesn't matter what the identity is. We're not going to jump from trans to gay, because what's the point of that? You're forcing something else that you think it is. We need to just give him room to be himself. And so we just kind of, that whole summer was pretty stressful. We really just tried to spend a lot of time outside and camping, and I got him into horseback riding, and then in December of 2020, the Kiara Bell case was in the news, and I learned about that, and I thought, oh my goodness, this is really something else. And that's when I joined the boys group and met Josie and got involved and really started learning about all of the pathways into trans. I don't think it's a straight path. There's not one way any kid gets into it. but the role of the parent is to really trace the steps back and figure out where they came from, because then you can figure out what they're looking for, what problem they're trying to solve with this identification. And now my son's 19, and he says he's bisexual, but he has a boyfriend. So I still think he's gay. And he went through a period where right after he turned 18, he lied to us and he went to Planned Parenthood and got the hormones. But we were able to stop that with some, just kind of talking to him and showing him all the studies. Like my husband actually put together a PowerPoint and just presented all of the studies and just said, look, this isn't what you think it is. And that didn't really affect him. He was still convinced that this was the right thing for him to do. And so I brought up the religious aspect of the ideology, because I think I've always thought I grew up pretty religious, and I've been very spiritual and religious my whole life. And as soon as I started learning about the truth underneath, if you look under the covers a little bit, there is a lot of religious faith-based components to transgenderism. And I kind of presented that as part of our PowerPoint aspect to it. And I just said, I never really took you as that kind of person that would just believe things without any evidence. And so I think it just ended up that it wasn't worth it to him to continue. And we were able to help him get off the hormones. And then he had a couple of weeks before he went to college. And basically our deal is, if you medicalize, you're a full adult and you have to take care of yourself. We can't do it. We're not gonna watch you do this to yourself. And so to him, he's told us, well, fine, I won't medicalize, but when I graduate college, I'm going to. And we think, well, let's play the long game. By the time he graduates college, he'll be 22 or 23. And hopefully by then he'll realize this isn't the thing. But, I also think if he's an adult, I'm going to let go. I'm not going to try to control him as an adult either. And it's been really nice that he's away at college, because we don't have to be the day-to-day, that stress of just watching every move, watching every facial expression, waiting for some other kind of drama to erupt. But I do worry about him, but he seems good. We FaceTime and,
Well, and it seems like everything you're speaking to is, again, what I hope folks can take home, and just love your children, offer that space. Ambiguity, especially in childhood and adolescence, is terribly uncomfortable. And for some, it can be horrible. And it sounds like what you guys focused on was not just the here and now and removing distress in the moment, but focusing on, let's learn how to be okay with this ambiguity, or try to explore everything without closing any doors physically, hormonally, medically, not medicalizing, just let's take an exploratory approach.
Mm-hmm. We tried a therapist. We tried two. The first one was a disaster. She totally affirmed him. And so he thought that was great to talk to her. But then she ended up leaving and discharging him. So she really only talked to him for about probably 45 minutes total in a couple of visits. And then this summer, actually, this was kind of a pivotal moment that helped him realize that taking the hormones wasn't that great, or wasn't going to really work out, because I found him a therapist and I said, look, you just got to talk to this guy. He's not going to try to talk you out of being trans. He's just going to kind of explore your life and your goals, and like, what are you doing? Where are you going? Like, you're not going to live here forever. And so you need to realize that eventually you need a job. You've got to get your life together. And so he talked to the guy, I think a lot, maybe once a week for a month or so. And then he came out of his room after talking to him, and he said, he thinks I'm wasting your money. And I said, oh, really? Why does he think that? And we paid him a lot of money. And he said, you're wasting your parents' money. You are just sitting here and you're just telling me the things that you've been rehearsing. And, if you're not open to discussing this, then we need to stop. It's not worth it. And I think the therapist breaking up with him was kind of hurtful. Like, he felt that somebody just said enough. That's it. And then after that, I said, okay, well, what are you going to do? What's your plan? How are you going to pay for college if we're not paying for it? How are you going to do this? And he didn't have a plan. So I said, okay, well, you have an option here. And he took it. It was his choice. I mean, I the whole time, it's your choice. And I, maybe some activist types might think that's sort of coercive to, be like that. But I absolutely know that I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I just blindly went along with it and never pushed back. The pushback is uncomfortable. Like, he told me about a week before he went to college, I'm so mad at you. I am so mad at you. I said, I know, that's okay. You can be mad at me.
Well, and I think one of the things that we hear often is that idea of the natural growth and separation from parents. We've seen that for decades, right? That there will be a time when your children have to push away a little bit, and that, like you said, the anger, it's okay to be angry. And I think that recognition that this was coming from a place of love from his family, but then additionally, what I found interesting about the therapist's approach of, I can hear you're just regurgitating things, and I don't know if this is exactly what was said, but were they things that he found online, or here's what you have to say to get to the next step? And I hear so many families and patients talking about the idea of, okay, go online, find information. Here's what you have to say to go get hormones from Planned Parenthood, or go get started on this track. And so it sounds like maybe you actually found a therapist that said, I'm not doing that. Discuss with me what you're going through, or don't. But is that?
Yeah, that's exactly. I mean, I found him through Geta.
Mm-hmm.
And he was great. I talked to him for about an hour before I hired him basically. And he just seemed like a really good fit. He seemed like he understood a lot of the spiritual emptiness that the kids are feeling right now. And I just thought that if he would have opened himself up to what this man's wisdom was, that maybe he would learn something or be open to it. And I think when he was here, I was thinking about what Maggie said about it's not really about the gender identity. What is it? What are they really running away from or running toward? And I think for my son, a lot of it is his sexuality. I don't think he wants to be gay. I really don't. I think he really struggles with that. And it's not because we're homophobic or anything. I mean, we're not. I just think that for some people, I would assume, I'm not gay myself, so I don't know what it's like, but I've read a lot of what other gay men go through when they figure out and accept their sexuality, and they have to accept a lot of things that straight people don't have to accept. Like, how am I ever going to have a child? And how am I ever going to, you have that, it is just kind of a stigma. And I think that he had, and he didn't want to work on that though. He just thought, well, if I just become a woman, then my attraction to men will be normal.
Well, and I think maybe putting this out to everyone, but certainly to you as well, Emily, that idea of, we talk with folks a lot about that puberty going through the process of puberty, that there's been kind of a shift in, now this has become identified as some sort of disease or trauma that you go through, when it's actually a very important developmental part of our childhood and process into adulthood, and coming into those, not only just hormones, but developmentally, it impacts every system. And a lot of that maturation, we do see children that developmentally, they're not ready to grapple with sexuality and being, whether it's same sex attracted or opposite sex attracted, or seeing things online that are very scary. Especially, we can talk a whole bunch about whether it's what they see online in chat rooms or grooming, all these different things that bring in very traumatic images of adult concepts they're not ready for. Trans becomes something that it's normalizing to that child. But if we can get puberty to be part of the normalization or that normalizing process, I guess maybe is the word, but that on the other side of it, nobody signs up and wants to go through puberty forever. There are awkward and difficult times with it, and we hold that with our children and stand by them through it. But then knowing that there's a tremendous percentage of the kind of resolution of the gender dysphoric part of things, transitioning into a sexuality that maybe they weren't ready to grapple with. And did any of you experience that or have discussions about that with either your child or your groups that you discussed this in?
I'm happy to jump in very briefly just to say that for some of us, like, our kids were so young that, in my case, my kid was 13, that it's in some ways it seems like it's an attempt to deflect from, it could be a whole range of difficulties. It could be sexual orientation, but there's also a lot of other things that are going on. As much as there are similarities between our children, there's also a lot of differences. And declaring a trans identity, I think, can essentially avoid going through the hard things. And so in some ways, I see with some of the kids that maybe they actually have never grappled with their sexuality because they start this before that. And so gay, straight, really, like, who knows? In some cases, they will go on hormones, puberty blockers and hormones, and that may never actually be something that they discover naturally.
But I love what you're bringing, I think, attention to, and this is so important, that for children especially, they go through whether it's trauma or anxiety or depression or so many mental health struggles that do exist in childhood. And of course, if there's this one thing that you can identify, that especially in school, If teachers are asking, is this what you're struggling with? They can identify as trans, and the focus is taken off of those other very difficult things to talk about, typically that take quite a bit longer to work through in their minds. And then you add celebration and a group to now be a part of, and children we know want, and adults as well, but want to belong to a group. That sense of belonging is so important as well. So like you said, not just sexuality, but certainly there's so many different, I think, mental health struggles and coexisting mental health challenges that are there that often get ignored. They don't get treated, and sadly then will still be there on the other side of puberty blocking or cross-sex hormones or surgeries.
I always felt like trans was something that he could actively work on to ameliorate whatever kind of angst he had. And like you said, like when the teacher says, well, what are you struggling with? Well, I'm trans. Well, then now everybody has a little project to work on and get the class to agree. And, thankfully, we were homeschooling during COVID when this happened. And then it took us a while to get back into public school. And the school never really, it's a huge, huge school that, where I live, there's a lot of immigrants and people that aren't into this stuff. So the school says they're cool with it, but the teachers don't really push it or anything.
I was going to say, for my son, it just seemed like a perfect storm. He got cut from the sports team that he thought that's what he was going to do in high school. And he stopped hanging out with his friend group from middle school. And because he wasn't a part of the sports team, that's who he hung out with. And he was no longer a part of that. And then he started hanging out with the Boy Scouts troop that don't go to his school. And one of the boys became trans identified. And then, then my son. So it just seemed like it just was perfect storm for him. And also he had, he had always liked this girl since middle school. And she said she was a lesbian. And then all of a sudden my son thought he became trans identified, and then they started dating and he became a lesbian couple. But I always wondered if the reason was to open the door to be with this girl, but I don't know.
Maggie, or Dr. Goldsmith, was any of this part of your path or anything that you saw? There were a lot of other things going on under the surface, but felt this was the.
I think that, well, for me and my kid, I think that I was sort of like, I was kind of a very connected mom, but I was also kind of a very formidable mom. And so my kid, she's super smart. Both my kids are super smart. And because they're so super smart, and because she's so super creative, I treated her like a grown-up. I treated her like I treated her like my best friend. Like she was like, like my husband didn't like going to plays and things. So like she would go to like see plays with me. We were so connected, and there were so many things that like we liked in common, and we really liked each other, like as friends. Like we had the best time together. And I think that made it really hard for her to separate, because it made it hard for her to make friends. It made it hard for her to make friends who were like not as I guess, engaging as mom, right? It's like moms, when you have a mom who's like so focused and so engaged and like so like ready to get on the ground and play and all of that, like, you know, who wants to make friends? But then you end up in high school, in middle school, and you're like, hey, how come I don't have any friends? You know, and you're like, it must be because, you know, I'm too close to mom, you know. There's so that also, you know, it's interesting that Josie said her son got cut from a sports team. You know, in the transition from middle school to high school, of course, friendship groups shift, but also like your affinity groups shift. So she was not like an athlete at school. She was not like the STEM kid, the robotics kid. But she was one of like the elite smart kids. But then when she tried out for like Model UN in high school, she was turned down because she wrote a controversial opinion, and the teachers didn't like it. And they, you know, they said no. And so she didn't have that either. So she was like, and, you know, and me being mom, I was like, hey, never mind. We'll go to the real UN, you know, and I'll show you around, and I'll even introduce you to some old friends I have who work, do you know, but like, that wasn't the issue. The issue was she needed friends, and she needed me to like step out of the way and let her sort of become, you know, fail and like tumble and all of that. And, so, yeah, I have to say that, like, you know, beyond, like, after her desistance, we have once again become very close. And it's sort of like we've transcended that together. We've grown through that. But she also, like, she has a lot of agency in what she will and won't do with me. And I've also like taken freedom and moved on in a way, and started doing things just on my own. But, you know, there's that. That's why I say that for my daughter, it was that close relationship that she didn't know how to separate from. So she needed to, rather than say that to me, she decided, well, I'll just become a boy. You know, I'll become a guy. And then, like, we won't be these like two girls hobnobbing together. I don't know. It feels very reductionist to put it that way, because I'm sure there are so many other things, you know, including the fact that, I mean, a lot of these kids are on the spectrum, right? I don't think that's come up today. And how sort of black and white they can be, and how rigid they can be. There might have been a touch of that for my kid. Certainly attention deficit is there, but also gifted. A lot of gifted kids fall into this because, you know, like they don't make sense to their peers sometimes, and their peers don't make sense to them, you know. So there's that piece of it too. I mean, it's so complicated.
And individualized, right? That's not a one size fits all. And I think whether we see it in schools or in an affirming approach to this, it's not a one size fits all. These are wonderfully unique individuals, all of whom are, like you said, many of them are gifted. They are just brilliant in what they want to discuss about themselves and others, but then there are other things where they don't connect as much. And so in those areas where they may even be more aware of how different they are, because they think differently and wonderfully different. But those things become maybe something that makes them feel like, okay, well, I have to identify differently, or well, and I think, yeah,
trans makes it all easy. You know,
sure.
It's kind of like very easy to say, okay, this is what I'm doing.
Sure.
You know, and you get to avoid the hard stuff, you know, the hard part of like actually adolescing.
Mhm.
You
And
know?
I do think there was a question that popped up, and I can't seem to find it, but something that said, do any of us on the panel believe that trans is not a choice? And I hope, and because I hear everyone saying it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, please understand that the distress that these children are going through is not a choice. They're not choosing to be in distress. And that's where we have to make a distinction between an identity and trans and exploration and things like that versus a gender dysphoria, that whether it's dysphoria that truly is based in gender or gender plus 10,000 other things, no child is choosing to be in distress, nor is someone, wanting them to be in distress. So please understand there's a little bit of a distinction, and I hope I'm making it clearly. And any of you on the panel, if you have anything to add, or if I'm not saying it exactly in a very clear way, I just want to make sure this isn't something that we're saying, oh, you just pick and choose. And I promise you it's not that.
Yeah, and I responded just with my own opinion in the answered section of the Q&A, which is why you can't see it right now, Lauren, but you can if you pop over to answered. But the only thing that I would add to what you just said is that I think that there is a large segment of society that is defining gender in such a way that distress is often actually not part of it at all. And so I think there's a range of distress. There's those who really are distressed. There's young children that may be just really distressed that they're the opposite, that they're not the sex that they wish they were. There's adolescents that are in the same case, but then there's also those, and I would really put those, adolescents who are using non-standard gender identities in this category, where they may not actually be feeling the type of dysphoria or distress, but are rather seeking to define themselves. And that's kind of a very 21st century element of all of this.
Yeah, no, that's a wonderful way to put it. I think absolutely. And again, kind of going back to, there's not this one size fits all. There's different. So yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. Is there any of you that want to add to that? Well, and we can go to some other questions if we'd like, or if any of you guys have seen any that came up in the chat that you'd like to answer live.
There's a couple that I saw in here that kind of speak to what my experience. So my son is not autistic. He's very bright though, and creative. And so I think his, magical mind can just imagine that, just like an avatar on a video game, you can just pick your gender. And so there was a question about the regressive nature of gender ideology. I mean, that question is a great question. I think it's a great thing to discuss with your child. But there was another one too about like not understanding how a man would want to avoid thinking of himself as homosexual, but then would still have to think about being sexually active with men. And that it's so logical to think those questions, but this whole thing is not logical. And these kids did not logic their way into this belief system. And I don't think some people think it's possible that you can still logic your way out of it. And I'm hoping that maybe one day my son will, but I think it's something that like a seed that gets planted and then starts to grow, and no amount of logic ever worked with him. I tried hours of talking with him, hours and hours and hours of, well, what do you mean? What? And even questioning him about the sexuality thing, and he would get all weirded out and, Mom, stop talking about orgasms. You're just driving me crazy with this. And I said, no, you have to understand, you will never be able to have pleasure with sex if you do this. And he just was horrified by even thinking of that. And I said, well, if you don't think about it now, that's gonna mess you up later.
Well, and I think additionally that I think that kind of does get into the developmental appropriate approach at different ages. If you tell a child at, say, age 12, well, if we remove your breasts, you won't be able to breastfeed your own child if you have one. To a lot of these kids, it sounds like, well, when you're 550 years old, that's when this is happening. I mean, there's just such a disconnect from them being an adult, considering being a parent. It's, I mean, even looking back, when I think if you asked me if I was 11 or 12, well, when you have your own children, I mean, that's just such a concept that many of them aren't ready to grapple with, or it doesn't feel like reality for them. And that I would never want to have kids, or never want to nurse my own child, or never want to have an orgasm. And those are developmentally for a lot of kids, their brains aren't there yet.
Mhm. Yeah.
I'd like to just
But
jump in.
there's people willing to sign them up for a lifelong
Yeah.
path of medicalization, knowing full well that these kids have no idea what they're getting into.
Kate, you
Yeah.
were going to add something.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in, and I don't know if Carrie's going to jump in on this one. Parent that is beating herself up about after Emily was talking about the way that she was able to get her child to discontinue the hormones. And I just want to share that I have a medicalized young adult who is in college, and I don't think there's a right and wrong way about paying for college while a child takes hormones. We're absolutely paying for our kid to go to college, but that was the right thing for my kid and my family. And there's a lot of variation, and your child's mental health is unique, and what you can risk and what you can push on, it's unique to your family and what you know about your kid. But also, I just want to say that please don't ever beat yourself up. I mean, I think all of us here, that we have a time, and we may have times on each day where we're beating ourselves up, but you really do need to move past that. There's so much that we're learning now about all of this that we didn't know a year or even a year ago. And so while I have a lot of hope for the future, I understand that there were, I think we all understand there are different choices that we would have made if we had known more, but you have to forgive yourself. You absolutely cannot live that way.
I'd like to also jump in with that same question. We did give our son an ultimatum because we really thought it would prevent him, but instead he left. So you do risk estrangement by giving your child an ultimatum. And I wouldn't wish that upon anyone, because, I've not talked to my son in a year, and it's heartbreaking. So don't beat yourself up. You did what you think is right in the moment, and you just got to listen to your gut sometimes. And, it could be right or wrong, but two people can do the same thing and have different results. So you did what you did, and I don't think anything more about it.
Well, and kind of to circle back, and I think you guys are speaking to this, but please know you are the expert in your own child more than anyone else on this planet. So whether it's a doctor or a therapist or a teacher or someone telling you this is how you have to do things, listen to your gut. There are times where, as parents, we don't do it perfectly. When you try to, that can have not great results either. So just know, loving your child any way and every way you can, it's the best any of us can do. And then also know there are support groups. There are groups out there that would absolutely support parents needing to talk about this, children and parents together needing to talk about this. This is going to be part of, I think, what we move into, knowing there's a lot of harm being done and clearly continuing to be done. So please know you're not alone, and reach out when you need to, and get help for yourself as well as your family. But yeah, it's it's important to recognize you as a parent, you are the expert in your child and that individual. So.
Yeah, it's really hard to know what to do. And it's really easy to you play that hindsight's 2020 game where you think, well, of course, if I knew what I know now, I would have done so many things differently. And that we really felt like giving this ultimatum was risky. And he actually left the house one day when we were starting to get serious about it. Took us a couple of weeks. My husband's very methodical, and so and we've always been a real tight team, and there's never been a break in our marriage. And we're the mom and dad, so we don't have like a lot of, and the whole family is the questioning type. We don't have any affirming family members. And so he left the house one day and was saying to me on text, I'm not running away, but I don't know when I'll be back, something like that. And I was like, oh, okay. And so he ended up coming back the next day, and we talked. And yeah, I mean, you have to just trust your gut and do what you feel is right, and try not to regret, because it's too hard to know. It's an unknowing thing.
And I think it's also a natural part of parenting. You know, it's not just unique to this topic, but parents that love and want the best for their kids are constantly second guessing and hoping they made the right choice. And I think the other part of this that I think generalizes much broader than just this topic is that making yourself the bad guy, that it's all your fault, that it's on you. This is why your child isn't feeling well, or is in distress, or isn't talking to you. Most of the time, we probably play some role as a parent, but there are usually 10,000 other things. And I think the other part of it is recognizing what is unique to this topic is that, unfortunately, right now, and I do think it's shifting, but medicine and psychology and schools and other parents want to blame the parents for not being affirming, and that's what's causing the distress. And that breaks my heart. And I do hope that we're making a difference in helping people understand that is not the case.
Can I bring up social contagion? What we found in the PITT Substack is that a lot of the parents had the same story. And these were parents from all over the world. And so many of the comments in the stories are, well, that's my story. But these two people live in different countries. So the only way that this is being pushed is through the internet, and these kids are all being sucked into it. And I just feel like it's hard to not blame, as a parent, it's hard to not to blame yourself, but you also have to look at those facts to know that that plays such a huge part of it.
Well, and providers as well. Emily, you made a really great point about this earlier. Finding either a therapist or a counselor, someone that's aware, they've got to be knowing what kids are hearing, whether they're diagnosing themselves on TikTok or, we see so many influences, and especially at this vulnerable age when they're younger, and it's, all of these influencers sound like experts, and they're presenting things online as being just, this is going to fix everything and make everything feel better. And in medicine and psychiatry in general, I talk with folks about, if there's certainty ever promised to you, you've got to question that and run. But kids don't know to question that. They don't know to question that the images they're seeing or the influencers that they're seeing, that's not the whole story. Developmentally, they're not there yet. And then there's a part, of course, that hopes that might fix everything. And so that's the other thing, is when you're looking, like Dr. Goldsmith was talking about, when you're looking for a therapist or looking for someone to help support your family and your child, be sure they're aware of what these kids are seeing and reading and coming to you, maybe quoting. They do find, here's what you need to say to get medicine, to get to make sure you can get on this track. So
yes, I would say if you're a clinician that is working with adolescents or young adults, you really have a responsibility to go to these places on social media, to go to the Reddit subreddits like RFTM for the way these young people are talking about their families, the way they're talking about their parents, the way they are there. And one of the interesting things to me is that I think that a lot of young people that are in those communities, they will be censored if they raise any questions within those communities. That's true. But then in many ways, if they're unhappy, they self-censor because they feel like, it was something to do. I'm the one where it's not working. It clearly works for everybody else, so I don't share my story. Well, there's this tension. Well, you're also not allowed to share your story. Your story will be removed. But you should be on TikTok if you're a clinician. You should be on Reddit. You should. There are Discord servers that you can get into and take a look at what's going on. And if you're not, you're missing a big piece of this. I really think it's important.
well, and I know we're running short on time. I think we could probably spend hours or days or weeks probably talking through more angles on this. And this has just been such an incredible, I think, just webinar. And, to your last statement, Kate, I've had folks say, we can't even talk about side effects, because if I say I have a side effect or I talk about that with a certain community, they're going to tell me, well, then you just probably aren't really trans, which is heartbreaking to think that anyone would be told that. So therefore you don't talk about the side effects. And it'd be like saying to someone who has depression and takes a medication for depression and has side effects and can't tolerate it, well, then you just don't really have depression. You're not committed to it. And it's just so many different heartbreaking stories. I'll just let each of you, if you want, end with maybe one additional thing if you feel like saying something. If not, like I said, thank you so very much for sharing your stories, and I hope these can reach so many more folks and help.
I just want to thank, this is Josie, the PITT community, for supporting us and supporting parents. We appreciate it. We took a chance and started writing, and it actually has paid off, and we're reaching people, and most importantly, we're reaching parents so that they're not alone and they're not crazy, and they can see how other people have dealt with the same thing with their own child, which helps other parents get through this. But thank you. Thanks, Lauren and Carrie, for doing this webinar.
And I'll just say, add my thanks to that. Thank you to FAIR. And thank you to Josie for starting PITT. The one thing I would add is that I'm very involved in schools and in education, and I know that schools get a lot of blame for what's going on. And certainly, I think in many cases they don't help right now, because so many people just don't have an understanding that they're approaching this topic with a bias. They just think that they are believing something that is true. And what I would say is, when you read the book, if you read the PITT stories, you'll see that this is in public schools, private schools, home schools. This is really a societal issue. And so there's a lot that you can do to protect your child, but your child will be out in society. And it's really important that you define your values and your beliefs with your kid, and to protect your family and yourselves.
This is Maggie. I just want to really say again, thank you for this opportunity to talk to to finally meet Josie and Kate and Emily and you. I just want to reiterate, please, parents, please take care of yourselves. This is probably the hardest thing you'll ever encounter. I've had parents say, I've been through divorce, I've had cancer, I've done this. This is really the hardest thing I've ever had to deal with in my life. So if you're feeling awful, it's completely like there are good reasons why that is, and you really do need to survive this, and you need to take care of yourself so that you can take care of your child. You're the most important person in all of this. So that's my goodbye to everyone. Take care.
Well, and thank you all. And again, if there were any questions that didn't get answered or anything that comes up afterwards, please be sure. I think Gavin put it in the chat for everyone. Send an email to us. We certainly want to try and answer things to the best of our ability. And then certainly if there's, anything else that we can help with, and please be sure, I know their book is on Amazon right now. You can go get a copy of it. You can get it on Kindle. I know I've got it on audio and Kindle and everywhere I can find it. So, highlight it, read it, get it in the hands of other parents, of families, of physicians, of therapists. Just get it out there as much as you guys can. Check out their Substack as well. It's wonderfully informative and helpful and caring and kind and supportive. So, like I said, I appreciate all of you joining us. This has been truly an honor to be a part of it.
Thank you.